successful and a holding against at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials insist that this is an isolated incident of the packet grenade. Okay. No, perhaps.
The truth has teeth, sharp ones. And if you gnaw on it long enough, sometimes it starts biting back. This time it led me to the edge of the map, where the ocean ends and the lies begin. They say Montauk is just a sleepy little town at the end of Long Island, a place for fishermen, retirees, and overpriced lobster rolls. But there's something else here too, buried beneath the postcards and real estate brochures. A cancer, a memory that won't die. A story so soaked in static and shadow it hums like a broken radio left on overnight. They call it Camp Hero. Abandoned, fenced off, officially decommissioned, but we both know what that means. Nothing dies in the dark. It just changes its name. The place reeks of old metal and sea rot. The kind of place where even the trees seem to lean away from the concrete, like they've learned better than to get too close. A Cold War radar tower juts in the sky like a babble of steel, abandoned, corroded, stuck mid-scream as if even time gave up on it. A rusted dish tilted like it's trying to listen to something the rest of us have long forgotten. They say it stopped spinning years ago, but some nights, they say it moves. Only a little, just enough to make you question if the rust is lying. People around here don't like to talk. They'll smile, pour your coffee, tell you the surf's good this time of year. But ask about the missing kids, the ones no one officially looked for, and their eyes go cloudy, like they're staring at something behind you. There are whispers of experiments, of children taken off the streets and put into machines that scraped through their skulls and made their nightmares real. They say the government wanted weapons, not bombs, but brains, weaponized minds, consciousness sculpted like clay, bent to the will of men in lab coats and military uniforms. One boy, they said, could see through time. Another, if you believe the legends, could tear holes in it. Some claim it was an extension of the Philadelphia experiment, a supposed naval disaster that vanished a battleship into another dimension and brought it back all wrong. Melted men into metal, opened doors we weren't supposed to know existed. Montauk was the sequel no one asked for. They had the funding, they had the bodies, and somewhere beneath that concrete tomb, they had the tech. Things that shouldn't exist outside of pulp novels and paranoid fever dreams. Time tunnels, thought amplifiers, interdimensional contact. And if you dig deep enough, past the disinformation, past the eye rolls of polite society, you'll find survivors. Or at least the men who claim to be. Broken voices, missing memories, implants behind the ears, stories that match across decades, even when the tellers had never met. Are they lying? Crazy? Programmed? I've danced with enough devils to know that sometimes the most unbelievable parts are the ones you're supposed to forget. So here I am, at the edge of the world with nothing but a battered mic, a dusty closet, 2 toaster slots, and an unhealthy obsession with government secrets and the unexplained. Because the truth is, you don't build a fortress over nothing. You don't fund a secret base with classified dollars just to leave it behind and let it rot. Whatever they did here, it wasn't over when the door slammed shut. They left something on, and it's still humming. Today we're tearing open the files, the stories, the suppressed memories. Welcome to Camp Hero. Welcome to Montauk. Welcome to where things get stranger than expected. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dancing Toaster. This is Nelly, and this is the place where we wrestle with the intersection of faith and the unexplained. Thank you for popping in, and I want to thank all my patrons, and I want to welcome all the new ones that have signed up to help make this show happen. It's so exciting to see more and more people committing to the show and to the work I'm trying to do with it. You know that I'm trying to present the information we cover in ways that are engaging, entertaining, and informative. I take the truth seriously, but I try not to take myself too seriously. That's doubly true for when we deal with the text of Scripture, which we use as a lens to view all the phenomena that we're examining. Sometimes that's easy, and we can go on an in-depth analysis. Other times we simply will glean some principles to apply. Either way, it's been exciting to see how many people are willing to go on this crazy ride with me, so thank you. Thank you to all my listeners that support in all kinds of ways. I have a major announcement for all of you today. The merch store went public May 6th. Shirts, hats, cups, mugs, notebooks, tons of stuff working on popping out even more. If you're wondering why you didn't know, well, it's because you don't follow me on social media. On Facebook and Instagram, it's simply @TheDancingToaster. Go give me a follow, leave me some love. That's where you can stay up to date. If you want to be even more in the loop, head over to the Patreon. You can be a free member and follow the news there, or to become one of the Toasties, it's $5 a month. You get early access to merch, you get ad-free listening, and you get access to my exclusive show called The Man-Eating Toaster, where I cover cults and bizarre true crime in the same unique style as The Dancing Toaster. You can also connect with me more directly over there. I'm trying to build that community up and engage a little more directly. But enough announcements. Today on our crazy ride, we go back out east to a little hamlet located on the eastern end of Long Island, New York, at the easternmost tip of the South Shore. The place is called Montauk, tucked out at the far edge of Long Island where the road narrows and the world starts to feel a little forgotten. It's part of the town of East Hampton in Suffolk County, sitting on the South Fork Peninsula like a sentinel facing the Atlantic. From Midtown Manhattan, it's about 118 miles east, but it feels a whole lot further from there and further from reality. Last week we talked about the Philadelphia experiment, something that allegedly happened over 150 miles northeast of Montauk. It was said that in 1943 they wanted to make the USS Eldridge invisible. Some say they even succeeded, but when they did, the ship teleported from Philadelphia to Virginia and then for some reason immediately back again. But when the Eldridge reappeared, it said that some of the crew materialized in walls and bulkheads, and they died in agony. Others simply lost their minds. What does any of this have to do with Montauk? Well, I'm glad you asked, because among some of the wildest stories associated with the project is the story that says 2 of those sailors from the Eldridge didn't reappear at all. The stories say that these 2 men were brothers who were presumed dead or lost, but they weren't dead. When they re-emerged, they not only traveled over 150 miles into a secret military base in Montauk, legend says they also traveled 40 years into the future to do it. Ripped from 1943 and dropped 40 years into the future, not into peace, not into safety, but into a hidden military facility buried beneath the edge of Long Island, Camp Hero, where they say the real nightmare began. They didn't volunteer, they were drafted by time itself, unwitting passengers on a ride that never should have existed. And there, deep below the surface, they became part of something even darker, they say, the infamous Montauk Project. The Montauk Project didn't just haunt old military bases, it bled into pop culture like a slow leak from a rusted pipe. You've felt its fingerprints even if you didn't know the name. Stranger Things, the Netflix juggernaut that turned dungeons and demigorgons into a household name, was born from this shadow. Before it became Hawkins, Indiana, it was supposed to be Montauk. Same monsters, same missing kids, the same government experiment lurking beneath the town like mold under wallpaper. The Duffer Brothers changed the name but not the DNA. And it didn't stop there. Documentaries like the Montauk Chronicles pulled back the curtain just enough to let the paranoia in, featuring interviews with men who say they were there. Men who claim their childhoods were stolen, rewritten, weaponized. Whether they're whistleblowers or victims or a carefully planted myth depends on how deep you're willing to dig. But if there's one name that keeps showing up at the center of this tangled mess of memory loss, mind control, and missing time, it's Preston Nichols. Now, I know we've heard stories from people claiming to have remembered things that no one else can verify. But Nichols wasn't just some guy rambling on a street corner. He was a trained engineer, specialized in electromagnetism, smart, articulate, and deeply embedded in military-adjacent research. It started in the early 1970s. Nichols, our sharp-minded engineer, was right in the middle of a world built on circuit boards and quiet secrets. As we said, he specialized in electromagnetism, the kind of science that hums in the wires when no one's listening. He was working for a defense contractor out on Long Island, a job that paid the bills but whispered something darker underneath. At the time, Nichols wasn't chasing conspiracies, he was chasing frequencies. He says he had been assigned to a government-adjacent project involving psychics. Real-deal telepathic subjects. Call it fringe science or call it madness, but Nichols claims that he and his team were getting results. Clear thoughts transmitted between minds, patterns forming out of the static, and then something strange. At exactly the same time every day, the minds of his psychic subjects would go dark, blacked out, like someone had pulled the plug on their consciousness. No warning, no explanation. It was as if something was jamming them. Nichols had no idea why, and for a man who dealt in certainties, that kind of mystery gnaws at you. He let it slide for a while, 3 years to be exact. But silence has frequency too. Sooner or later, the silence started humming, and he brought in the kind of tech that belongs in basements, bunkers, or haunted houses. Oscilloscopes, transceivers, radio scanners tuned not to voices but to intentions. That's when he found it. Every time the psychic blackouts hit, a very specific signal would allegedly flare up, right in the 410 to 420 megahertz range. 20 minutes of heavy static, then gone. And like clockwork, the psychics' minds would unlock again, like someone had released the grip on their skulls. It wasn't random, it was like a broadcast. And broadcasts have a source. So Nichols built a mobile transceiver and hit the road. A portable device that can both send and receive radio signals, basically a two-way scanner tuned for hunting invisible transmissions. He rigged up signal tracking gear and drove across Long Island, chasing the strange broadcast that was jamming his psychic experiments, like a ghost hunter tuned to static. Antenna spinning, signal sweeping, he tracked the interference across the island like a hunter chasing something he wasn't sure he wanted to catch. It led him to the edge of the world, Montauk Point. A forgotten tip of Long Island, battered by wind and waves, and more importantly, crowned by a massive radar tower that looked like it hadn't slept since the Cold War. The Montauk Air Force Station. Established in 1942 as Fort Hero, the site was named in honor of Major General Andrew Hero, Jr., the U.S. Army's Chief of Coast Artillery from 1926 to 1930. During World War II, the Army expanded and renamed it Camp Hero, transforming the location into a coastal defense installation. It featured massive gun batteries, including 16-inch naval guns housed within fortified concrete bunkers designed to protect the eastern seaboard from potential German naval attacks. In an effort to conceal the military activity, the base was cleverly disguised to resemble a New England fishing village, complete with buildings constructed to mimic civilian homes and storefronts. By 1951, the U.S. Air Force assumed control of the site, and on December 1, 1953, it was officially designated Montauk Air Force Station. The installation became a key part of the Air Defense Command's radar surveillance network, initially hosting the 773rd Aircraft Control and Warning Squadron, which was later restructured into the 773rd Radar Squadron under the SAGE Semi-Automatic Ground Environment System. One of the most notable features added during this time was the AN/FPS-35 radar, a massive long-range surveillance system capable of detecting aircraft over 200 miles away. Installed in 1960, the radar tower stood 85 feet tall and remains the only one of its kind in the U.S., still standing with its original antenna intact. Montauk Air Force Station was officially decommissioned on January 31, 1981. Due to the sheer scale and complexity of the radar tower, it was not dismantled, but simply abandoned in place. In 2002, the grounds were reopened to the public as Camp Hero State Park, spanning 754 acres and offering hiking trails, picnic areas, and access to the Cold War-era structures. That same year, the radar tower was added to the National Register of Historic Places, preserving its legacy as both a military landmark and a cultural icon steeped in both history and mystery. When Nichols strolled up to that place, it was still active, but not in any way he could explain. And whatever was broadcasting from there, it was invasive, deliberate. For a while, the interference kept coming. Then, like a magician pulling the tablecloth clean, nothing. The signal stopped. Dead air. Nichols didn't think much of it, not until years later. That's when he got the call. A friend told him the Montauk base had finally shut down, abandoned, no cleanup, no ceremony, just left. Like the people inside had vanished mid-task. So Nichols drove out there, just to look. Curiosity maybe, or something deeper. Some part of him trying to remember something he couldn't name. What he found didn't match any military protocol. The place was a mess. Debris, papers, tools strewn about like someone hit the fire alarm and didn't come back. The kind of disarray that doesn't come from budget cuts. It comes from fear. And in one of the hollowed-out buildings, Nichols met someone. He says he met a young man, dirty, paranoid, living like a shadow among the ruins. The vagabond said he used to work there as a military technician. Said he deserted. Nichols asked him why. And that's when the real story spilled out, half whispered, half shaking. The young man said there'd been a project, something massive, something unnatural. And then one day, a beast. A creature ripped out of someone's nightmare, or maybe everyone's. It tore through the facility. People ran, screamed. Some never made it out. The project collapsed like a house of cards. Nichols laughed it off at first, until the man looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You don't remember, do you? You're Preston Nichols. You ran the Montauk Project." And just like that, something shifted. A frequency beneath the surface of his memory. He said it started humming. But by the 80s, things got stranger. By 84, Nichols had already been neck-deep in unexplained signals and psychic blackouts, but now the shadows apparently started talking back. He began working with a man named Duncan Cameron, someone who claimed to be a gifted psychic, extremely gifted. Duncan apparently wasn't just sensitive to energy, he seemed to bleed it. His mind was like a cracked radio, always tuned in to something no one else could hear.
Sounds like his mama maybe dropped him on his head a few times.
Dr. Wright, I had a feeling you'd chime in sooner or later.
At this point, I think most of your listeners would prefer to hear me. I'm basically doing you a favor.
Oh, so you can leave me alone and go start your own show then? Instead of the dancing toaster, you can be the boring stick in the mud.
Let's not be so hasty nor so nasty. I just want to help.
Oh, the verdict's still out on that, but I'll let you get your 2 cents in eventually. Just let me finish my spiel here.
I suppose that's fine as long as you don't bring on any of those unpleasant fellers like that quack Dr. C or that bonkers basement dweller Vincent.
Hey, it's Vinny Pencil Neck. I've been patched in since the Cold War was lukewarm, baby. You want to talk Duncan Cameron? You want to talk Philadelphia? You want to talk Montauk? I got folders. I got diagrams. I got napkins from a Greyhound station in Jersey with coordinates scribbled in government ink. Look, Duncan wasn't just some spoon-bending hippie with a Wi-Fi headache. He was the payload. They didn't plug him into the Montauk chair because he was psychic. They did it because he was already tuned into something older than time and probably angrier than the IRS. And Nichols, Nichols wasn't running experiments. He was spinning a carousel of human consciousness, time loops, soul swaps, and astral bleed-throughs, you name it. And the beast, that wasn't some hallucination or lab accident. That was Duncan's nightmares made flesh. They weren't just messing with reality. They were inviting it to dinner, putting a fork in its hand, and letting it carve the turkey. Vinny, breathe, my guy, breathe. I haven't even touched on half that stuff yet.
I think my IQ dropped just listening to that dribble.
Hey, shut it. You'll get your time to shine later. Both of you need to chill out, or we'll never get through any of this. Where was I? Ah, yes, Nichols. Nichols brought his new, strong, psychic acquaintance Duncan to Camp Hero. Now long abandoned, swallowed by vines and silence, but the moment Duncan stepped onto the grounds, something flickered behind his eyes. He pointed and said, "That's the mess hall that way. The labs were underground, and there used to be a corridor between the transmitter and the chair room." Nichols hadn't told him anything about the layout. Didn't need to, apparently. Seemed like Duncan knew. They say he knew everything. As they moved through the decaying facility, Duncan began recalling details no civilian should have known. Room numbers, equipment layouts, the locations of sealed-off tunnels. And then they entered the transmitter building. The place that once pulsed with power and psychic residue. Duncan froze. Then he collapsed into a trance. His body stood rigid, but his voice dropped an octave like something else was speaking through him. He said he had been programmed, a sleeper agent wired to locate Preston Nichols, befriend him, and then eliminate him. Once that objective was complete, he was to destroy Nichols' lab and all his research, erase everything he had uncovered, It wasn't just mind control, it was sabotage disguised as friendship. But apparently, awareness broke the cycle. Because Duncan now knew, he was able to resist the programming.
Oh, how convenient.
Shut it. You're on probation. Nichols rushed him back to the lab and used what he called a deprogramming technique to unravel the layers of artificial memory and mind control. It wasn't hypnosis. It was apparently deeper, like pulling shards of truth from a mirror someone tried to smash. And they say it worked. Duncan gained control of his mind again, and with that control came memories. Painful ones. He'd been there before, but not just in Montauk. He claimed he was also on the USS Eldridge. He said he was there in 1943, he and his brother, Edward. Nichols was stunned. According to Duncan, they were the two sailors who went missing during the Philadelphia experiment, the infamous attempt to render a battleship invisible. Not only had they vanished from the ship, they reappeared 40 years later, dropped straight into the future, straight into Montauk, straight into the project. And now they were back, one in body, one in memory. As the days wore on, Nichols began to feel the seams in his own life stretch and tear. People at work, people he didn't know, would nod at him like old friends. He'd get copied on classified memos, added to meetings that had nothing to do with him or his department. He once sat at his desk and felt a sting in the back of his hand. He looked down, fresh bandage, blood underneath, but he hadn't cut himself. Not that morning, not even that week. This happened more than once, enough times that Nichols stopped asking questions until he couldn't anymore. One day he cornered the company nurse and asked if she had treated him. She just stared at him blankly. Then she said,
"No, you haven't been in here. Why would you need a Band-Aid?"
He didn't have an answer, because part of him didn't remember, but something else did. Then came the basement. A restricted area, off limits. Only about 10 people had clearance to go down there. Nichols wasn't one of them. But something pulled at him one day, a whisper beneath thought. A compulsion wrapped in static. He took the elevator down. Told himself he was just curious. But his feet moved like they'd made the trip before. He approached the security guard, heart racing, rehearsing excuses he'd make, but the guard didn't blink. He looked at him and said, "Morning, Mr. Nichols." Then he handed him a badge with his name on it. Preston walked past the checkpoint like he belonged, because apparently he did. He moved through the corridor as if guided by muscle memory, turned left without thinking, stopped at a door he shouldn't have known existed. Inside was an office, spacious, well-kept, high level. And on the desk a nameplate, Preston B. Nichols, Assistant Project Director. He stared at it for a long time, not out of disbelief, but almost recognition. His two lives had collided. The engineer, the ghost of a program buried in government concrete. The Montauk Project wasn't just a conspiracy anymore. It was personal, and it was written into his very bones. By 1990, he claims the memories came back, one by one, like file drawers opening on their own. And what he remembered was worse than anything he'd imagined. Decades of secret programs, children pulled from the streets, experiments on time, thought, and even reality itself. And he wasn't alone. Around the same time, a man named Al Bielek, a soft-spoken engineer, began having flashes. Not dreams, not fantasies, but memories. Of a life he didn't live, of being a man named Edward Cameron. Of serving aboard a ship called the USS Eldridge. With a brother who was named Duncan. And now they were both here, 40 years later, grappling with fractured identities in a program that should have never existed.
Oh, there it is, baby. That's the glitch, baby. The ripple, the deja vu dripping with government aftertaste. You ever get a paper cut from a file you don't remember reading? Ever walk into a room you never seen and know exactly where the light switch is? That ain't coincidence, Nelly. That's residue. That's your mind trying to buffer the two save files at once. That bandage on his hand, that wasn't for this Preston. That was for the other one. The one who clocks in through the back door of reality. The one who's been punching a time card in a timeline that got rewritten with invisible ink.
As weird as everything has been, we're still only getting started, Vinny. So we now got Al Bielek, claiming he'd once lived as Edward Cameron, a naval officer aboard the USS Eldridge, back before the world unraveled and time got rewound like a broken tape deck. Bielek spoke at conferences, he wrote books, sat in dimly lit interviews, and described things no sane man should remember, let alone live through.
He said things no sane man should ever even say.
Well, maybe. He was saying he didn't just witness the Philadelphia experiment. He said he was inside of it. Remember, when the Navy activated what they called a magnetic bottle, the Eldridge didn't just turn invisible. Some say it slipped. Reality buckled like cheap metal in a house fire. The sea around the ship twisted, the sky rippled, and according to Edward, Al here felt the universe give way beneath his boots. Panic set in. He and his brother Duncan did the only thing that made sense in a world suddenly void of it. They jumped. 1 second they were mid-leap. The next, they were somewhere else entirely.
They went to the year 2137.
Well, that's what Al claims. Al says he or Edward woke up in a hospital, his body torn up from radiation exposure, skin burned, vision warped, and Duncan gone. As he recovered, he learned just how far things had gone off the rails. He claimed the United States was unrecognizable. Florida and much of the East Coast had vanished beneath rising tides.
Oh, well, that's nice. Climate change folks will be thrilled.
That's good, Doc. That was good. California was a scattered chain of islands. The Great Lakes had fused into one massive inland sea. The country, if you could even call it that, had fractured. A nuclear war had shattered civilization sometime in the mid-21st century. The West had gone toe-to-toe with Russia and China, and everyone lost. According to Al, the world's population had dropped to around 300 million.
Oh, I'm sure Bill Gates will be happy about that one.
I agree there. By 2137, the governments had crumbled. What was left were city-states under martial law, ruled not by flags but by fear. And just when Al or Edward thought it couldn't get any stranger,
Well, let me guess. He said it got stranger?
he did. He felt it again, that shift, that cosmic whiplash. Suddenly, he wasn't in 2137 anymore.
He jumped forward in time again. He was standing smack dab in 2749.
Well, that's what he said. Life in the 28th century made the 22nd look like a burning dumpster behind a used parts store. He claimed cities floated more than 2 miles above the earth, massive anti-gravity constructs suspended in a sky that looked less like weather and more like software. The ground below, long abandoned. Farming, construction, resource management, it was all handled by AI-controlled machines, endlessly coordinated in digital silence. No hunger, no poverty, no currency. Everything you needed, food, shelter, purpose, was given freely, as long as you contributed.
Oh, how nice. According to Mr. Split Personality here, the communists won.
Sure sounds like it, Doc. He claimed the AI ran it all. And for a while, Edward, Al, whatever we're supposed to call him here, he drifted into that utopia. But he said something was off. He once said,
People weren't people anymore. They were smiling ghosts in recycled bodies, walking hallways lit by a system that didn't need them.
they had comfort, but no identity. A paradise, sure, but one that had the faint smell of a prison cell.
The Matrix, Nelly. We're all gonna be stinking batteries. Maybe we're already there. How would we know we ain't?
Chill out, Vinny. Let me finish. There's more to this vision quest. Without warning, there was another jolt. Another temporal shift. The brothers were dragged through time's undertow, twisted in its current until they surfaced again, this time in 1983. And perhaps resurfaced isn't the right choice of words, because Al claims they found themselves deep below Earth's surface. They were deep underground. None other than Camp Hero, under the grip of the Montauk Project. Here they were debriefed, warned, told to forget, but memory isn't always obedient. Back to the present, or at least the present narrative, the moment in 1990, the veil was now gone. Bielek, Nichols, Duncan, Cameron, all remembered. The Montauk Project, the Philadelphia experiment, the experiments on minds and matter and memory, it all came back. Their memories didn't point to something buried. They pointed to something still running. Almost 2 decades prior, back in '67, some say researchers at Brookhaven National Laboratory had already caught wind of the incident aboard the Eldridge. What fascinated them wasn't the ship vanishing. It was what came next. They discovered something disturbing. The men aboard the Eldridge, those who survived, were unusually susceptible to mind control. That was the breakthrough. This is something that has truly fascinated our government and many governments over the last century. Because if you could control a man's will, you didn't need to fight him. You could tell his army to lay down their weapons. You could make him love his enemy. You could win wars without firing a single bullet. And if you could do it to a soldier, you could do it to everyone.
Oh, yes, now we're cooking in the microwave of madness, baby. You think DARPA and the Alphabet Boys out here investing billions in drone tech and brain chips just for fun? Nah, this is the real war zone, Nelly. Right here. It's right here, right in the mind. If you can hijack a man's will, you don't need boots on the ground. You just install new thoughts, hit restart. Why fight an enemy when you can reprogram him to agree with you? Why occupy a country when you can make them thank you for doing it? Look at history. MK Ultra wasn't a glitch, it was a demo. The Eldridge boys, they were just a beta test. A few sailors zapped through time, came back with soft heads and open channels, and the military said, we can work with this. Mind control ain't sci-fi, it's just the final update. And once they patch into everyone, well, welcome to firmware humanity version 2.0. Consent optional.
Oh, please, can someone mute this circuit-fried lunatic?
Hey, I am a circuit, Doc, and the line's still live. We can go outside and you could catch these hands.
Whoa, I'm tempted to let that happen, but both of you need to calm down. I actually don't like just how much sense you just made there, Vinny. We know that the government was trying to control people's minds in the 1950s. MK Ultra is going to get its own episode, though I might need to bar both of you so I don't get interrupted every 5 minutes. Let's get through our narrative portion before we start further analyzing anything. Apparently, the Brookhaven scientists were intrigued, and of course the Pentagon would be enthralled at such news. But they needed a place, isolated, fortified, off the map. They found it in Montauk, specifically the Montauk Air Force Station. It was abandoned, remote, already loaded with Cold War-era hardware, and most importantly, housing the largest radar antenna in the world at the time. Montauk Air Force Station, later known as Camp Hero, was the home to that massive Cold War-era radar system known as the SAGE radar, specifically the AN/FPS-35. At the time, it was one of the largest radar antennas in the United States, perched atop a tower more than 90 feet high. As previously mentioned, it was designed for long-range air defense detection. The system was capable of tracking aircraft from hundreds of miles away. Its location remote, windswept, and positioned at the easternmost tip of Long Island. The perfect place for testing high-powered radar without civilian interference. The base was isolated by design, built to keep secrets and catch shadows moving on the horizon. Was it a tower tall enough and strong enough to reach into people's minds from hundreds of miles away, though? It was, according to these men. They said it could, if it found the right frequency. If it found the right frequency, it could crack open the human mind, rewire the species. So that was the plan, and the switches were flipped, the antennas lit up, and the Montauk Project began. The tower was humming now, not with static, but with intent. And at the heart of it, plugged into a machine built to scrape thought from bone, was Duncan Cameron. He wasn't just part of the project, he was the project. The closest we have to L or 11 if you watch Stranger Things, a living psychic conductor, a man whose mind could ride frequencies most of us don't even know exist, let alone name. That alleged ability, his sensitivity to electromagnetic energy, was exactly what made him so valuable and exactly what made him so dangerous. They strapped him into a chair, not just any chair, the one that would be dubbed the Montauk chair. It looked like a torture device stolen from a future that never happened. Heavy, cold, wired up with coils and sensors like some kind of neural executioner. 3 receivers, 6 channels, and a supercomputer breathing behind it like a mechanical beast. The purpose? Amplification. You sit in the chair, and whatever flickers behind your eyes doesn't stay in your head. It gets broadcast, displayed, projected. Thought became data. Imagination became blueprint. Nightmares became protocol. The early tests were crude. Electric shocks, variable frequencies, just to see how much Duncan's mind could handle. They discovered certain frequencies made him feel joy. Others made him collapse into sleep. Some triggered panic. Others rage. It seems that they were learning how to tune the soul like a radio. And it wasn't just Duncan feeling the effects. Animals started acting strange, deer charging storefronts on Main Street, birds dropping dead mid-flight. It was like nature itself knew something was wrong. Like the earth was trying to reject the signal. Then came what they called the seeing eye. If Duncan had a strand of your hair, or a personal item of yours, it said that he could ride the psychic tether straight into your senses. He could see what you were seeing, hear what you were hearing, feel what your body felt anywhere on the earth. It was like remote viewing in 3D and in 4K, taken to its final terrifying conclusion. Eventually, they figured out how to do more than observe. It said they started inserting thoughts, programs, commands. It began with emotional suggestion, fear, loyalty, lust, hate. Then it moved to behaviors. Make someone act irrationally. Make someone betray a friend. Make someone turn a gun on themselves if the mission called for it. Assassinations, sabotage, suicide. It was all on the table. And Duncan? Well, he was the scalpel. But that wasn't the end of it. At some point, the data on the screen stopped being just digital. It's claimed that one day Duncan thought of an apple and it appeared on the monitor, then in the air, holographic, flickering, then solid, real, tangible. He thought it, and it became. They called it thought manifestation, the ability to materialize objects from psychic projection. And with enough power, enough amplification, they figured out how to tear a hole in time. A vortex. Not just a vision, not just a dream, but a literal rip in reality. Step through it and you weren't just changing rooms, you could change centuries. Hence Al and Edward's field trip through time. But this is where another name enters the equation. Dr. Jan von Neumann. It looks like Dr. John von Neumann. Von Neumann was a genius, a mathematician, quantum theorist, and Manhattan Project veteran. You know, the secret U.S. government research initiative during World War II that developed the first nuclear weapons. He was supposed to be dead, February 8, 1957. Cancer is the official story. But according to Nichols and company, that death was staged. Von Neumann had been moved, vanished, placed into a black program, but Preston allegedly found him, old and tired, but waiting. According to Dr. von Neumann, the original Philadelphia experiment failed not because of the faulty science, but because one of the ship's generators malfunctioned. That malfunction caused the most horrific outcomes, men becoming fused with the ship's metal, others losing their sanity. But von Neumann believed it could have been prevented. If someone could go back in time and disable that generator before it was activated, the ship could have reappeared without the catastrophic results. No deaths, no permanent damage. Duncan and Edward Cameron were chosen to carry out that mission. Using the Montauk chair, the experimental device believed to project consciousness across the world and even across time. Duncan focused on the Eldridge and locked onto the year 1943. A portal opened. The brothers stepped through. They found themselves back on board the Eldridge in the middle of the experiment. They were able to locate the malfunctioning generator and shut it down. Edward chose to stay in 1943. Duncan returned to Montauk. Are you lost? Yeah, me too, and I'm the one telling the story. It's kind of a mess. They claimed the repeated exposure to time travel had taken its toll. Duncan's body began to deteriorate. The accumulated stress of time jumps and psychic strain accelerated his aging, and he began to die. The problem was more serious than just one man's health. Duncan had become a key part of the Montauk Project's timeline. His presence, abilities, and actions were tightly interwoven with the entire structure of events. They say if he died at the wrong moment, it could create paradoxes, serious disruptions in space-time. To prevent that, the scientists sent a message back in time to Duncan's father, Duncan Cameron Sr. At the time, he only had a daughter. The message urged him to have another child, specifically a son. So he did. In 1951, Duncan Jr. was born, but he claims he wasn't just a regular child. According to the story, Montauk scientists used him as a host, a vessel to carry Duncan's psychic signature. It was a way to preserve continuity, to keep the timeline stable. Duncan's consciousness would continue, just in a new body. It was complicated, experimental, controversial, but in their minds, it was totally necessary.
Oh, come on. How much longer do I have to listen to this nonsense? Does he meet Terminator next? Is he also going to be his own grandpa or something? Good gosh.
Calm down, Doc. I share much of your frustration, believe me. I'm just trying to report the case as is, and we can pick at it in a little bit.
Well, hurry up, because I think my brain's melting and it ain't got nothing to do with no radar dish or telepaths.
According to the story, the Montauk scientists didn't just monitor Duncan, they replicated him. They used a newborn child not merely as a host, but as a continuation of the original. The idea was to carry over Duncan's psychic abilities into a new body. Same mental signature, same unique traits, just starting over in physical form. Edward, however, experienced a different fate. Rather than being reborn, they say his consciousness was transferred. The scientists claim to have moved his memories and identity into a young boy named Al Bielek. They called it age regression, but it wasn't a physical rewind or a freak in a pamper. It was more like uploading an adult mind into a child's body.
The goal, they said, was to preserve the timeline, avoid paradoxes, and prevent other such disruptions. By continuing the lives of Duncan and Edward in altered forms, they believed they could hold reality together. But according to Preston Nichols, something wasn't right. He said he could feel the strain, as if the fabric of reality itself was beginning to thin. Things that should have been stable started feeling fragile. The more they tampered with time and identity, the more unstable everything became. Eventually, Nichols came to a conclusion. The project could not continue. Not because it was too strange or too secretive, but because it was breaking things that couldn't be repaired. So he chose to shut it down. And that's when an old safeguard activated, something built into the program long ago, a phrase. It wasn't mechanical, it was psychological, planted deep within Duncan's mind. The time is now. Someone whispered those words into his ears while Duncan was in the Montauk chair, and something happened. Not a glitch, not a vision. Something tangible, something real. Something escaped containment somewhere on the base. Not a thought or an image, but a living force. Tangible, physical and dangerous. Not part of the plan, not part of the test. Something, he says, they couldn't control. Now that's what I'm talking about. You thought it was all cables and codes, didn't you? Just some nerds in lab coats spitting out ones and zeros. But nah, man, this was Frankenstein meets HAL 9000 with a splash of ancient Babylon for flavor. They didn't just copy Duncan, they cloned a soul, slapped a psychic operating system into a fresh meat suit and hoped the cosmos wouldn't notice. And Eddie, don't even get me started. Poor guy downloaded into a kid like he was the newest iOS update. Age regression, they call it? Please. That's not science. That's cosmic identity theft. But here's the kicker. They knew it was fragile. Nichols, he felt it, felt the timeline starting to fray like an old pair of government-issue socks. And when you start bending time into origami, eventually the folds start tearing. And that phrase, the time is now, that wasn't just a password, bro. That was a psychic nuke, a verbal detonator planted in Duncan's brain like a sleeper agent built out of nightmares. And what came out of that chair? Yeah, that wasn't just some mental junkyard dog. That was raw subconscious rage, unfiltered and real. No leash, no cage, no off switch. That wasn't a glitch in the Matrix. That was the Matrix biting back. To Preston Nichols, it was more than a creature. It was a problem. A 10-foot problem, covered in hair, eyes like furnace embers. It moved with rage. The rage of something not born but manifested. Something pulled too hard through the veil and snapped. It tore through the base like it had a grudge against every bolt and brick in Montauk. Screaming, smashing, wrecking rooms that hadn't seen daylight in years. According to Nichols, whatever it wasn't a hallucination. It was very real, and it was very angry. Nichols says his supervisor panicked, ordered the power shut off, cut the flow from the generators, but nothing changed. The creature didn't even blink. They shut down the Montauk transmitter, still nothing. They called the utility company and had the main line severed. Killed the external juice, still the light stayed on, they say. The hum persisted, the screams remained. Power, it seemed, was coming from somewhere else. And so was the monster. Desperate, Nichols grabbed an acetylene torch and stormed into the building housing the transmitter control unit. He yanked out every wire he could reach, ripped the guts out of the system. The lights flickered, and then they died, but the machine kept breathing. Somewhere in the distance, he said, he could still hear screams. So we went further. He took the torch to the transmitter itself, cutting wires, cables, conduits, even hacking apart major pieces of equipment, melting steel like it owed him money. He says the burn marks are still there, scorched into the metal in memory of that place. Eventually, he says it worked. The portal Duncan Cameron had opened, the one the creature had crawled through, finally snapped shut. The beast was gone, and with it, so was the Montauk Project. At least for Nichols. But for others, it was just beginning. From the late 40s into the early 50s, the U.S. government allegedly learned how to do something they called bending time. And throughout the Montauk years, from the early 70s until '83, they apparently used that knowledge. The experiments needed people, a steady supply. Unfortunately, in typical government fashion, they didn't go looking for volunteers. They went looking for throwaways. Boys from broken homes, runaways, kids who wouldn't be missed. They called them the Montauk Boys. Most were between 10 and 15 years old, children pulled from chaos, then fed into a machine designed to erase their minds and rebuild them from scratch. Stuart Swerdlow is one of the most well-known alleged Montauk Boys. He says he remembers waking up strapped to a hospital bed. The room dark,
damp. The walls were made of stone. Strangers encircled him. He wasn't alone. Nichols later said that most of the experiments were conducted deep beneath Montauk Air Force Base, in tunnels and chambers few people even knew existed. The goal, according to testimony from several alleged participants, was simple and horrifying: create programmable humans. Children who could be mentally fractured, reassembled, and triggered at will. Soldiers who wouldn't question orders. Agents who wouldn't remember the crimes they committed. Slaves in plain sight. Some have gone as far as to connect these Montauk boys to acts of terror decades later. One in particular is the infamous Oklahoma City bombing. Though that's another topic for another time, suffice it to say that no evidence has ever confirmed those claims, but the accusations remain, buried in fringe forums and whispered in conspiracy circles. To break the children down, the scientists allegedly used starvation, torture, and electric shocks, cold water immersion, sensory deprivation, drug-induced disassociation. The methods sound more like medieval punishment than modern science. One man claimed he was regularly given LSD in a section of the base called the acid house. Another said his body was used as a power conduit to amplify the psychic signals of Duncan Cameron while he sat in the Montauk chair. Most of the children, Nichols claims, didn't survive that phase of the experiments. And if that's true, their bodies could still be down there, deep beneath the base, nameless and forgotten, by all except secret file cabinets and God himself. It's said they wanted hundreds, maybe thousands of programmable minds for secret operations. Human weapons switched on with a phrase, turned off with a sedative. Real winter soldiers.
See, this is what I've been screaming into the microwave about for years. You don't build a top-secret radar fortress, funnel street kids in like cattle, and run them through medieval trauma Olympics unless you're cooking up something dark enough to block out the sun. Programmable humans, Montauk boys, that ain't fringe, that's prototype. That's MK Ultra with the training wheels off and the brakes cut. You think they were trying to create assassins who knew what they were doing? Nah, Nelly, they wanted ghosts, killers who pulled a trigger and then baked cookies at the church potluck, never knowing why their hands smelled like gunpowder. Oh, and that acid house. Oh, buddy, go dig through declassified CIA docs and you'll see a greatest hits album of exactly that. LSD, isolation tanks, forced regression. These weren't experiments, these were blueprints. And don't even get me started on the Oklahoma thing. I ain't saying it's true, but I ain't saying it ain't. You think it's a coincidence that the guy behind it had missing years and a blank slate military record? There's a reason that whole narrative smells like bleach and shredded paperwork. If you believe even half of this stuff, then there are still children out there walking around, grown up now, not knowing what's buried in their heads. In Montauk, it's not just haunted, it's echoing. Hurry up, get to the Garitano stuff.
Who does this guy think he is, interrupting me every 5 minutes, now telling me what to talk about? And rubbing off on me, apparently.
I'm sorry. Do your thing.
Yeah, would you hurry up so we can get this freak show over with?
Don't you start, and you don't have to be here. Nobody's forcing you.
Nobody's paying me either. Ain't you got a Patreon thing?
Yes, but both of you, please, shut up. I'm going to talk about Garitano now, but not because either of you said so, because that's where I was going anyway. In the summer of '83, a young boy named Christopher Garitano was just 8 years old, barefoot and curious, sifting through the sands of Montauk Beach like any kid would. But what he found wasn't seashells or driftwood. It was metal. Odd, out-of-place fragments buried in the shoreline, sun-warmed and cold in ways that didn't make sense. He dug them out, tucked them in his arms, and turned to run back to his family, eager for answers. That's when the soldier appeared. A man in uniform, not part of the beach crowd, not part of the moment, just there, sudden and commanding. He barked for them to leave, no explanation. Just the kind of forced urgency that plants a seed in a kid's mind. A seed that didn't stop growing. For Garitano, that moment became the origin story of an obsession. As the years passed, he returned to Montauk again and again, driven to understand what he brushed against that day. What he found was a patchwork of contradictions and architectural lies. According to government records, the Montauk Air Force Base, later called Camp Hero, was closed in '81. It was supposed to be sealed off, dormant. Just another relic of the Cold War gathering moss and stories. Most importantly, it wasn't supposed to have anything underground. But Garitano noticed manhole covers spread across the base grounds. Dozens of them.
Oh, come on, not this. These are just simple drainage systems.
Maybe, but maybe not, Doc. One of his visits, he says he brought a geophysicist and ground-penetrating radar equipment. What they found was startling. A large concrete structure buried 20 feet down. Something big. Something designed to be hidden. They weren't alone in their discoveries. Urban explorers had been poking around for years, filming dusty corridors, sealed-off stairwells, and rooms that shouldn't exist. Some claim to find bricked-in tunnels. Were they trying to keep people out? Or were they trying to keep something in? Others found evidence that the base had stayed active long after its supposed closure. An explorer named Brian Minnick uncovered receipts from the late 80s, documentation showing over $80,000 per week spent on food supplies. It raised an obvious question. Who was eating that food at a base that was officially abandoned? Over the years, dozens of people have popped up claiming they had been part of the same experiment, the same nightmare. Some say they were used, others say they watched it all unfold from the inside. The U.S. government denies it all.
That's standard operating procedure.
Fair enough. They say Montauk is nothing more than an old station, that these are just ghost stories with better lighting. So who are we to believe? That's the question that lingers in the static between broken testimony and government silence, between what you're told and what you find under the sand. This story, Montauk, the chair, the time portals, the boys, has left a deep mark on the world of fringe theory and pop culture alike. It's one of those tales that manages to crawl under your skin and stay there, regardless of whether you believe it or not, like it has to me. As mentioned before, it even inspired the earliest drafts of what we now know as Stranger Things. The original title of the show was Montauk, and the first scripts mirrored several elements pulled straight from Preston Nichols' accounts. Missing kids, secret government experiments, small town hiding something dark beneath the surface, and a creature that ripped a hole foolish men arrogantly opened. The name was changed, the setting moved to Indiana, but the DNA of Montauk is still pulsing through every episode. In Stranger Things, we meet 11, a child with extraordinary psychic abilities, trained in remote viewing, telekinesis, and telepathy under the control of a shadowy government lab. This storyline closely mirrors claims made about the real-life Montauk Project, where whistleblowers allege that similarly gifted children were subjected to MK-Ultra-style mind control. These abducted kids were said to be used in covert experiments designed to awaken psychic powers, including telepathic communication and astral projection. The show's portrayal of test subjects, children taken from birth and reduced to numbers like 11, also has eerie parallels in Montauk lore. Figures like Preston Nichols and Bielek claim that hundreds of boys were kidnapped and experimented on in secret facilities. These children were allegedly wiped of their memories, afterward their entire involvement buried under layers of psychological suppression. As the series progresses, it introduces the concept of the Upside Down, a twisted, mirror-like dimension filled with danger and decay. This too is rooted in the Montauk narrative and is something we'll return to in the future. According to Nichols, the experiments at Camp Hero opened unstable rifts into other dimensions. Through these portals, researchers allegedly encountered entities and realms not meant for human contact, some benign, others overtly hostile. While time travel remains a background thread in Stranger Things, particularly in seasons 3 and 4, it's front and center in the Montauk mythology. Nichols described time tunnels beneath the base, vortexes used to send people, especially children, backward and forward through time. This is the stuff that I find to be the most absurd, but we'll revisit these themes more specifically and directly in future episodes. Some were allegedly dropped into ancient history or projected far into the future, becoming pawns in missions no one ever publicly acknowledged. I find all of it absurd, if I'm being frank with you, but again, it will get its own time. If they had the ability to do these things, I think they'd be abusing it far more. Then there are the monsters. The Demogorgon, the Mind Flayer, creatures of nightmare that seep through cracks in reality. Montauk lore offers something just as chilling, accounts of beings crossing over through psychic or technological means. The mysterious Montauk monster, the grotesque entity brought into our world through a psychic projection gone wrong, one so unstable it destroyed equipment and ended experiments entirely. The fictional Hawkins National Laboratory may be pure Hollywood, but its real-world counterpart isn't far off. Camp Hero, an actual decommissioned Air Force station, is at the heart of all these allegations. Once a place of Cold War radar defense, it's now a public park, though the old SAGE radar still looms over the area like a relic of forgotten secrecy. Locals have long whispered about bizarre happenings in the area, strange noises, government vans, and sealed underground chambers. Now for me, working on this episode, researching it, reading the strange testimonies and theories, just like the Philadelphia experiment, the more I dug into the people at the heart of it, the more frustrating it became. Let's start with one of the living figures of the Montauk story and one of the most colorful, Stuart Swerdlow.
he's still a very vocal proponent of the Montauk Project narrative, but Swerdlow's claims stretch well beyond the experimental halls of Camp Hero. He says he survived imprisonment by the Illuminati. He claims to speak 10 languages, though strangely there's no known footage or record of him speaking most of them in any public setting. He says his DNA has been altered with alien genetics, that he can see energy fields most people don't know exist. According to him, he can navigate hyperspace, trace his bloodline directly back to lost civilizations, the lost civilization of Atlantis specifically. Stuart Swerdlow isn't just part of conspiracy lore, he's woven himself into every thread of it. Moon bases? He's been there. Inner Earth civilizations? He's in contact. There's practically no theory too far stretched for Swerdlow to not only endorse, but to personally grift and star in. Vinny, I know you believe in most of it, if not all of this stuff, but even you have to admit that it's suspicious that one guy happens to be part of everything in conspiracy circles.
Suspicious? Pfft, Nelly, come on. Suspicious is when your neighbor suddenly starts mowing the lawn at midnight wearing night vision goggles. This is cosmic destiny, baby. Look, you call it being in every conspiracy, I call it central casting for interdimensional weirdness. Maybe the guy's nuts, maybe he's lying. Or maybe he's the Forrest Gump of the fringe world. Right place, wrong timeline every single time. DNA spliced with aliens? I've seen weirder at the DMV. 10 languages no one's heard him speak? Maybe they're the kind you feel not here. In Atlantis, listen, my grandmother swore we had property there before it sank. Don't test me. But real talk, Nelly, either this dude is the biggest fraud since New Coke, or he's the most suppressed memory in human history. And until I can prove otherwise, I'm keeping him on the maybe pile, right next to Elvis is still alive and JFK's time-traveling clone.
Oh, for the love of Newton's wig, Vinny, you'd believe a grilled cheese sandwich was an interdimensional portal if it had grill marks shaped like a pyramid. Let's be clear. Stuart Swerdlow is less of a whistleblower and more of a walking refrigerator magnet for conspiracy collage. Atlantis bloodlines, hyperspace navigation, talking to lizard people on moon condos. This isn't disclosure, it's delusion, dressed up in New Age pajamas. And the languages he speaks that no one's ever heard, that's not mysterious, that's called lying where I'm from. You don't get to be fluent in 10 invisible dialects and then charge people to deprogram their chakras using pet vitamins and cosmic cough syrup. He's the cameo king of conspiracies. If you told me he showed up in the background of the Zapruder film waving at the camera, I wouldn't be surprised. Just tired.
I hadn't even gotten to that part, Doc, but yes, he does charge for some strange things and Stranger Things. Sorry, that pun is not going to go away until the end of the episode. For a fee, he offers to deprogram your mind from the psychological shackles allegedly placed there by shadow governments, interdimensional beings, or ancient alien priests. He also sells a colorful assortment of potions, vitamins, and even pet care products, all supposedly designed to help you purge toxins, balance your aura, and align with universal frequencies. If you Google him, let's just say it's less of a rabbit hole and more like the hole you see in a porta potty. For me, there are enough red flags around this guy to host a parade. Who knows, maybe his herbs, vitamins, and dog biscuits for higher consciousness will help you ascend to better frequency. Personally, I ain't clicking add to cart. To me, the dude is off his rocker, and he's a grifter, and actually destroys some of the credibility of these things. But we'll come back to that. If he were the only problem with Montauk, that would be bad enough, but it gets worse. You can disregard Swerdlow as a grifter, but what about the two men that are really at the center of the story? Let's talk about Al Bielek. He's the man who famously claimed to have served aboard the USS Eldridge in 1943. Not under his real name, but while inhabiting the body of a man named Edward Cameron.
Too bad no one with either one of them names was ever on the Eldridge.
You're right, Doc, nor was there ever a Duncan Cameron reported on the ship either. In fact, there are no records of brothers with those names serving together on any ship in the Navy. Naval records of Eldridge crew members and ship logs have been declassified, and they do not include these names.
Whoa, wait a minute. What if the records were scrubbed or changed or something?
Fair enough, Vinny, as our government has done worse than that, but it gets murkier. In his writings and lectures, Bielek would show family photos, claiming this person or that one was Edward or Duncan. Every single one of those claims was proven to be false. Researchers identified the individuals and found that none of the people in the photos were who Bielek claimed them to be. Some images were from unrelated families or publications, raising serious questions about intentional deception. Most telling of all, perhaps, is the fact that Bielek had no memory of the Philadelphia experiment until conveniently 1984.
Yup, right after he watched that Hollywood film, The Philadelphia Experiment.
You're right again, Doc. I don't like saying that too much, though. He claimed it triggered his memories, but the details of his story, they're almost a carbon copy of the movie's plot. But come on, Nelly, you know these people always hiding the truth in plain sight. Well, there's a lot of truth to that, Vinny. On that we agree. But Bielek also reported struggling with paranoia and other psychological issues throughout his life. And he made a living selling books, selling merchandise, and speaking at UFO conventions and conspiracy conferences, raising further question about his motivations. The entire Philadelphia experiment was brought to question in our previous episode. Actual crew members from the USS Eldridge, who are on record, deny anything unusual ever occurred during their service. Several have gone on record stating that the ship was never teleported and that the Philadelphia experiment was entirely myth. Al Bielek, the man who made some of the most outrageous claims in connection to Montauk, died in 2007. And yet to this day, many believe his story. His supporters argue that the government launched a disinformation campaign to bury the truth by discrediting him. Perhaps that'd be easier to believe were it not for the man at the heart of all the Montauk lore. The most problematic of the bunch, in my opinion, which is why I've saved him for last. There had been whispers about Montauk before Nichols ever put pen to paper. Old rumors, scattered stories. But it was Nichols who took those whispers, twisted them into a narrative, and gave them life on the printed page. He opened his first book with a kind of fork-tongued disclaimer. This work is presented as non-fiction as it contains no falsehoods to the best of the author's knowledge. However, it can also be read as science fiction if that's more suitable to the reader. In other words, believe it or not, just buy my book either way. No, the worst part isn't about time travel or telepathy or psychic warfare. It's what Nichols claimed was necessary to deprogram people from their Montauk trauma. In his own writings, Nichols describes his deprogramming method in troubling terms. It required physical contact. Very physical contact. Usually unclothed, and usually during a state of arousal. He claimed this was essential to help young men unlock suppressed memories and break free from their mind control. What it looks like to me is abuse of the mentally disturbed by a disturbed pervert. Preston Nichols didn't just write about the Montauk chair, he rebuilt it. Not in some classified lab, but in his own home. He created a replica, complete with wires, coils, and that cold, clinical hum that was supposed to echo the original. Eyewitnesses, more than one, claim they saw him take young men into that room, men in their early 20s, sometimes a little older, always vulnerable, always searching for something. These were not 5-minute checkups. These sessions lasted 20 to 30 minutes, sometimes longer. When they were over, the impressionable young men would stumble out looking dazed, hollowed and disoriented, and Nichols would walk out after them drenched in sweat like a pig. The methods he employed were clearly unorthodox and deeply troubling in my opinion. According to investigative journalist Chris Ketchum, Nichols' techniques involved the guided relaxation, intimate physical contact, and yes, sexual stimulation under the guise of nullifying the sexual magic of the Montauk chair. All of this creepy nonsense happened when Nichols regularly hosted what he called Montauk night meetings, casual gatherings where he'd invite people, mostly men, into his home to share stories and undergo the so-called deprogramming. These men believed they were Montauk boys, the survivors of the mind control experiments they supposedly couldn't remember. Nichols claimed he could help them recover those memories and undo the programming. His creepy and unconventional methods drew direct inspiration from Wilhelm Reich's fringe theories about sexual energy and organ healing. It's all perverted, New Age nonsense. Nichols, influenced by these demonic teachings, believed that releasing sexual energy was essential to breaking the government-installed mental blocks. While participants reportedly consented to these sick methods, the ethical implications are murky at best. These were vulnerable young men, many grappling with mental health issues, past traumas. Nichols offered them a narrative that framed their suffering as the result of secret government experiments and conveniently positioned himself as their sole savior. Despite the lack of formal abuse allegations, Nichols' actions raised serious concerns, in my opinion. His methods blurred the lines between therapy and exploitation, and his self-fashioned role as a healer allowed him to manipulate those seeking help and answers. The Montauk Project narrative, as constructed by Nichols, appears to be a house of cards built on dubious claims and ethical transgressions. When scrutinized, it collapses, leaving behind a legacy not of hidden truths, but of manipulation and exploitation. It didn't happen once or twice. At the height of it, Nichols claims he was deprogramming as many as 25 Montauk boys multiple times a week. I so hate that he called them his disciples. They lived together in a house not far from his own, a house full of pain, confusion, and blind loyalty. To them, he wasn't just a researcher, he was their rescuer, the gatekeeper, the spiritual father, the one who would untangle their broken minds and broken pasts. And how many men passed through that door, into that room with that stupid chair, we'll never know. But it wasn't a few. It was enough to leave questions no one wanted to ask, enough to stain the edges of the story. In the pages of the Montauk Project books, Nichols casts himself as a reluctant prophet, a man swept up by forces beyond comprehension. He uncovers secrets, he meets giants of science, he travels the razor's edge between dimensions. In that story, he's the last honest man in a world built on lies. But outside the pages, the picture starts to blur. Because maybe Nichols didn't build a machine to unlock time, maybe he built a trap. My opinion is that he preyed on men who were already carrying wounds, mental illness, childhood trauma, addiction, isolation. He handed them a story that explained it all. You're not broken, he told them. You're programmed. You're not alone. You were chosen. And then he made himself the cure. It wasn't just a conspiracy anymore. It was a community. The Montauk boys were a family, a lifeline, a myth that gave their suffering context and purpose. And Nichols was, of course, at the center of it. The cost of belonging? Allegiance to the man with the chair. Here's the twist that makes it all harder to ignore. I know, another plot twist, and it may sound surprising to some. A lot of what Nichols said could have happened, because the US government did do terrible things. I've told you many times about MKUltra. It was very real. So too were radiation tests, LSD experiments, illegal surveillance, mind control trials, all documented, all proven for those with ears to hear and eyes to see, all proven, all ignored for years. So when Nichols folded time travel and aliens into that already bloody deck, the audience didn't flinch. The foundation was cracked wide open. All he had to do was build on it. But what he built wasn't sturdy, it was fragile. A house of cards that only stands if you believe all of it. Bielek's time loops, Swerdlow's alien ancestry, Nichols' heroism. Take one piece out, the whole thing collapses. Or does it? You see, I'm not convinced all of this was made up. I think something real happened, something very dark. Not just fringe experimentation or the kind of Cold War paranoia we read about in textbooks. I'm talking about real psychological warfare, weaponized trauma, mind control, and yes, mind control, maybe even on kids. We already know about MKUltra's existence. That's not a theory, it's a documented fact. The government dosed its own citizens with LSD. They ran illegal psychological experiments in hospitals, prisons, brothels. They shattered people and called it research. So is it really that hard to believe they took it further? I believe they did. I believe they targeted the kids no one was looking for. Runaways, orphans, boys from broken homes. The disposable ones, as they're called. The ones who sadly wouldn't be missed. They didn't need volunteers, they needed victims. They broke them, starved them, shocked them, drugged them until there was nothing left but an empty frame, a blank canvas waiting to be rewritten. Then they tried to fill that space with programming, commands, triggers, like loading code into a machine, Manchurian Candidate style. But here's the part that goes beyond science, the part that goes beyond even conspiracy. I think they touched something they didn't understand in the process, something darker, something spiritual. I believe there's a point where trauma stops being clinical and starts being cosmic, when you attempt to erase a soul from an image bearer, when you try to overwrite what God created with wires and chemicals and rituals. You don't just damage the person, maybe you open a door. And I think there's a chance they did. And I think whatever came through was not something they could contain. So they tried to bury it. And everything else along with it. They shut the whole thing down, not to protect the public, but to protect themselves. To erase the evidence, to stop the bleeding before it swallowed them too. But erasing it wasn't enough. I believe they smothered it in noise. They wrapped the real horror in a blanket of madness. Let every eccentric, every grifting opportunist, every fringe voice add their own layer of confusion. Alien, sure. Time travel, throw it in. Atlantis, oh, why not? They flooded the story with so much insanity that the truth, whatever was left of it, got lost in the static. Because that's how you kill a truth you're afraid of. Not by denying it, by making it unrecognizable. If anyone gets too close, you just point to the rest of the circus. Let them laugh at the whole thing and walk away. They don't even have to lie. They just let the lie speak louder than the evidence. So that's my theory. It wasn't just a cover-up. It was a camouflage made of chaos that many of these men participated in, knowingly, unknowingly, I don't know. But it was a wall of noise, a firewall made of fools and fabrications, because if no one can find the signal, then no one can prove what really happened. And maybe that's why the Montauk story never goes away, because something in it might actually be true. Like I said, I believe they opened a door that they would try to open again. But this time, they wouldn't need radar towers or ruined Air Force stations. This time they'd use something more refined, more clinical, more plausible. In 2003, the CIA declassified a document originally written 2 decades earlier, in 1983. The title? Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Process. Sounds harmless, bureaucratic, like a white paper written by men in ties and fluorescent offices. But don't be fooled, because within those pages, buried beneath the military jargon and scientific references, is a blueprint for what can only be described as state-sponsored astral projection. That's right. The Gateway Process wasn't a theory. It wasn't a fringe idea whispered through the halls of some abandoned bunker. It was a real, documented government program. And it was designed to do the unthinkable, project one's consciousness beyond the body. They sought to access other dimensions, bypass space, and if the process worked, maybe even time itself. The report was authored by Lieutenant Colonel Wayne M. McDonnell, a U.S. Army intelligence officer who was tasked with analyzing the Monroe Institute's techniques for consciousness expansion. Let that sink in. An official Army officer writing a classified report about expanding consciousness. McDonnell wasn't some wide-eyed hippie or self-proclaimed energy healer. He was military brass, armed with charts, citations, and a mandate to figure out whether this mind-bending project had real battlefield potential. At the center of it all was the Monroe Institute, a private research organization focused on altered states of awareness. Founded by Robert Monroe, a former radio executive turned out-of-body explorer, the Institute claimed it had cracked the code on how to make human consciousness step outside itself and travel. They called it the Gateway Experience. The idea was deceptively simple. By using a specific blend of sound waves, what they termed hemisync. They believed they could synchronize the left and right hemispheres of the brain. That synchronization, in theory, would open the gateway to expanded awareness, lucid out-of-body states, and eventually, contact with other realms. This wasn't just meditation with a soundtrack, this was meditation as a weapon. According to the report, once the brain was properly tuned, once the electrical activity was brought into harmony, subjects could enter focus states, each one representing a deeper, more detached level of consciousness. Some examples: Focus 10, mind awake, body asleep. Focus 12, expanded awareness. Focus 15, no time. Focus 21, the bridge to other realities. You heard that right, a bridge. The CIA was actively studying whether consciousness could leave the body, traverse space, and bring information back across a bridge. Intelligence gathering, espionage, even communication with non-physical entities, all supposedly on the table. And then it gets weirder, because McDonnell's report doesn't just dip its toe into metaphysics, it cannonballs into the deep end. He references quantum physics, holographic reality, and even ancient Eastern beliefs about the vibrational nature of existence. The report suggests that all reality is essentially energy, vibrating, resonating, forming patterns that the mind can tap into under the right conditions. According to the gateway theory, if you could learn to control those vibrations, if you could detach your consciousness from your physical anchor, you could theoretically travel backward in time or forward. Not as science fiction, but as government-funded exploration. McDonnell even included a diagram of the universe as a toroidal energy field, a donut-shaped vortex of consciousness and time where the self can loop in and out of physical experience like a needle skipping across a record. And here's the kicker. Buried in the later pages of the document is a casual bombshell. The out-of-body state involves projecting energy patterns generated by the consciousness in a manner that allows it to move beyond the confines of time-space.
Folks, that wasn't a novelist speculating. That was a government analyst summarizing what the Army believed was possible. But it gets even more unsettling, because deeper into the report, McDonald drops something else. Something that feels less like a scientific observation and more like a warning wrapped in clinical language.
The Department of Defense should be intellectually prepared to react to possible encounters with intelligent, non-corporeal energy forms when time-space boundaries are exceeded.
Read that again. Not poetic metaphor, not sci-fi fan fiction. That is a direct quote from a military intelligence officer writing to the Department of Defense. They weren't just experimenting with consciousness, they were preparing for contact. Not with Russians, not with spies, but with beings. Intelligent, non-corporeal beings. Entities that live or operate outside time-space. That's not me editorializing, that's the language of the report. And here's where it all ties together, because when you strip away the lab coats and electrodes, when you pull the military jargon through a biblical lens, that quote starts sounding a lot like something we have heard about before. Not in classified files, but in the Bible itself, these non-corporeal intelligences. Daimon means intelligence, where we get demon. Sounds an awful lot like the entities the Bible's been warning about. The principalities and powers found in the heavenly realms. Paul didn't use the word frequency, he didn't talk about toroidal energy fields or Focus 21, but he did say this. Ephesians 6:12. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. These weren't metaphors. What if the U.S. government stumbled into the same battlefield that Paul described? Not with swords and shields, but with brainwave generators, sound frequencies, and consciousness projection. What if all their attempts to hack reality just ran face first into the same war that's been raging since Eden? Because here's the uncomfortable question no one at the Pentagon wanted to write down. What if the beings on the other side aren't just indifferent energies, but hostile intelligences? I believe that in chasing power, we've opened doors God closed for a reason. Because the moment you start trying to leave your body, detach your soul, and override the image of God written into your mind, you're not just playing scientist. You're trespassing into spiritual territory you know nothing about, and eventually, something notices. We're more than likely going to pick this up next week. Not Montauk, but we'll go into more detail concerning the gateway process. See just how deep that rabbit hole goes, and see just how close to the occult the government was playing. I may have left you with more questions than answers today, but I've told you before, that's all right. This is one of the most complicated cases I've ever covered. So much of it is so absurd. Other than Gaetano, I don't too much like or trust any of the other major figures involved in Montauk lore. I think they were unwitting pawns in a dangerous game, and those who think they hold the pieces to the game are being controlled and manipulated by forces they can't even begin to comprehend. We still got a lot to say about the stories and themes from the last 2 weeks. I hope you'll come back and join me. Whether you believe any of this or not, whether or not you agree with my assessments or not, hop in the passenger seat. Let's continue on this interdimensional Uber ride together. I hope you learned something. If you didn't, I hope you were at least entertained.
Don't forget to tell them about the merch.
Oh, that's right. That's so nice of you, Vinny.
Nah, all this talk of Philly, you owe me a cheesesteak.
Always a catch. Yes, please go check out the merch store. Should be in the description, thedancingtoasterstore.printful.me. There's more to come there as well. Thank you for listening. Please like, please subscribe, leave a review, share the podcast, do all the things wherever you consume The Dancing Toaster. But whatever you do, don't consume toasters, and don't let raging interdimensional monsters consume you. I love you. I'm out.
Report suspicious activities and call 911 for immediate response. Expect delay.
Nobody else moving tanks in from the south. Stand by.
Flight 022. Maintain approach. You're clear for
Expect traffic delays and restrictions. Take personal security precautions to avoid becoming a victim of an attack. Avoid crowded public areas and gatherings. Not travel in areas affected by the attack or in a known area of elevated virus activity. Keep emergency supplies accessible and a full tank of gas at all times. Official